I don't know if we have any funny bits for this episode. Do you remember anything?
Oh, I'm sure you could find something in there. There are moments where I was like, yeah, that sounds funny.
Maybe this will be the one right now.
Damn it. Shit. Hello, and welcome to the Interstate Gamers Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin, a.k.a. K-Slugs.
My name is Peter, a.k.a. Deal for Real, and I'm also your host.
Well, welcome everyone to the 52nd episode of the Interstate Gamers Podcast. Yeah, that intro was something I've had in my mind for like the past hour. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant. So I hope it is as brilliant as I thought it was going to be in my head. If not, sorry for the cringy moment, but welcome everyone. It's been a crazy year, has it not, Pete Boy?
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah. From just an enormous amount of uncertainty. You could probably understand why, some of our episodes haven't been as on time as they usually have been, or maybe some of you just really didn't notice. But yeah, so sorry for the delays, but we're back in action. We're still committed to this thing, so don't you worry, folks.
Yeah. As the holidays draw near, we'll probably be skipping some weeks every now and then out of necessity. But rest assured, we're still cranking out the episodes when we can. We still got a schedule. Our schedule isn't quite the word I meant because our schedule changes, but a plan. We got games planned out is what I meant to say. And so don't worry about us if you don't hear from us for a little bit. Rest assured, we're still kicking. Speaking of kicking, this game actually has nothing to do with kicking, but I just wanted to say that. I think we're about ready to dive into this game. Shall I introduce it?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. This game is none other than Cadence of Hyrule, Crypt of the Necrodancer, featuring The Legend of Zelda.
Hell yeah, brother. I was excited to play this game when we were going into it. I was like, man, look at that soundtrack. Look at that soundtrack. I guess you listen to the soundtrack, but listen to that soundtrack. It was pretty cool. I was excited about, playing this game purely because of the soundtrack, but we'll get into the what I think about it later, but how are you feeling about going into this? I
was pretty excited. It was a game I had on my radar for a while. It came out in 2019. I don't remember exactly when in 2019, but it definitely piqued my interest. I'd never played anything quite like it before, so I was excited to do that. And also, Zelda content's generally pretty good, so I was stoked for that too. The title of the game is pretty unwieldy, though, the full title. It gives a super power rocket battle cars or whatever, kind of a run for its money. But some of the background information. So Cadence of Hyrule, as we will henceforth be calling it, is kind of a spin-off crossover between the Zelda series and the Crypt of the Necrodancer game, which came out in 2015, so kind of a while back. That game was developed by an independent Canadian developer called Brace Yourself Games, who had approached Nintendo with an idea for creating a Zelda-themed DLC pack for their game. And eventually the conversation became, let's do a crossover collaboration, like a full game separately, not just DLC. So that's what we have here today as Cadence of Hyrule.
Wow.
This game's pretty interesting. It's a rhythm roguelike game, which I guess we'll talk about a little bit more when we get into gameplay. But it's a fun little indie title. It has a bunch of DLC packs that came out. I think we'll be talking about the stuff that the base game offers primarily. And it's like a $25 game too, so it's not a huge like $60, Botswa type commitment / purchase. But anyway, I think that's enough from me from the context, unless you have anything to add before we get into gameplay.
Yeah, I just want to say that I've never really played a rhythm game quite like this one. Like I've played some rhythm games, but not any that have like translated into like real-time gameplay. So that was weird and interesting to handle going into it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we can start talking about how that translated here in the gameplay section.
Hell yeah.
Kev, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I guess I'll continue my thoughts there. Yeah, really good segue. But yeah, so never really played a game quite like this one. I will say, and I didn't know it was a roguelike at first. I thought it was just a game you could casually play, and I knew that it was 2 players, so I was like, oh, Katie, come play this game with me. But it ended up being a lot harder than we imagined originally. I bought this game whenever it came out. I think that's when we first bought it. And we kind of put it back down because it was a little bit difficult. But I picked it back up for the podcast, and I still had a lot of trouble when I first started out. I was just dying left and right. And I was like, how can this be any fun? How can anybody enjoy this game? I even texted Peter. I was like, how? Like, what? Like, I knew he had gotten past a lot of it, and you said that you enjoyed it. But I was just like, what is going, like, am I just rhythmic? Oh my gosh, how do you say it?
You're challenged in some way, as we can see.
Yeah, rhythmically inept, or like, what's going on here? There is a setting that you can do to what's the setting called? You know what it's called, right?
It's called a fixed beat mode, I think. First, let me say, so the whole point of the game is that you can only move, you and the enemies and all the objects on the screen can only move in time with the beat of the music. That's the whole point. So that's why we're talking about, if you're having trouble at the beginning, does that mean you're rhythmically challenged? It could be, but it definitely gets a lot easier as the game goes on, both as you get better at the game and as you get more items and power-ups and stuff. But I just wanted to chime in there and say, like, you need to understand that point of the game for any of this to make sense moving forward. Right.
Yeah. Sorry. It's kind of a hard game to explain too. But yeah, at first I had a lot of trouble, and for a good amount of time in the game, I was like, oh my gosh, this sucks. Then I switched to fixed beat mode, and I was still getting destroyed. And I was like, what is the problem? I don't understand. And the problem ended up being that I was just trying to hack and slash, through the enemies, not realizing it was a game that was made to be a little bit difficult. And so then once I switched to fixed beat mode and then kind of figured out, oh, the enemies have their own attack patterns based upon what you do, then the game started to make a little bit more sense. And like a lot of people I read online said the gameplay is more like, the movement is more like chess. And it's kind of weird because every move that you make, an enemy will also make a move. So adding rhythm on top of that really makes the movement kind of chaotic. And I will say that I don't like it. But I definitely think it's different, and it's a really cool way to spice up the gameplay. I think fixed beat mode is a little bit more enjoyable for my tastes. It was a way for me to slow the game down and kind of see what was going on and kind of take it all in a lot better. I played primarily in fixed beat mode. It also made the movement like sort of a strategy game, like a turn-based strategy game, because you could sit there and like think about what your next move is going to be. Whereas the rhythm mode is kind of like after a certain amount of time, you have to make a move, and you also have to make sure it's on beat. So I think it was just way too much for me to just think about in terms of moving. So I guess I didn't like that. I kind of like to move freely with my games. And so that's my critique and my problem with it. And I feel like a lot of people in general, a lot of gamers in general would have a hard time with this game. And it's not as welcoming as I thought it would be. So I could see it being really challenging for a majority of people.
Yeah, I've definitely seen some differing opinions on this. And it sounds like I'm kind of on the other side of the aisle compared to you because, I don't want to make this about me being an epic gamer, but maybe that is just the case.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
I really enjoyed the rhythmic aspect. It definitely kind of overwhelmed me at first. I think the tutorial does a good job of introducing you to everything. And the game tries to make it easy for you to keep in beat if you're not someone who's naturally rhythmically inclined. Like they have a visual bar at the bottom that helps visually show you when the beat's going to happen. There's a bunch of actually like accessibility related options that are very helpful if you need them. I thought it was cool that they included all that. But after the tutorial bit, things really do amp up very quickly. And I found myself dying a lot too and getting frustrated. Like in the first dungeon, before I really had a bead on or an understanding of the way that the enemies moved, because they all move differently. They all have different patterns.
Right.
I was just getting bopped left and right.
Yeah.
And I got frustrated too. There was a point where I was like, man, I kind of feel like stopping right now. And I was like, no, I gotta power through for the podcast for all the people out there. And actually, I've heard this same comment where people find the beginning very difficult. But then after that point, you start getting more heart pieces, you start getting more weapons, which increase your range and increase your damage and all this stuff. And it actually becomes, in my opinion, and some others' opinion as well, pretty easy by the end of it. To where like you have too much stuff and you can start like brute forcing your way through the ending levels rather than like taking stock of everything and moving strategically the way that the game obviously wants you to do. I don't think they got the difficulty curve quite right. And I think kind of your experience can also attest to that. Like at the beginning, maybe it's just too hard.
Yeah, it's interesting. If we didn't have the podcast, would we have continued to play this game?
I think I would have.
Yeah.
I could feel it being within reach. It didn't feel like I was just totally out of my element.
Yeah, it was like it was such a lopsided, like, getting hashtag wrecked, that it was like, okay, I must be doing something wrong. So you're like constantly trying to figure out what that right thing is. And I think once you figure that out, it becomes a lot better. And the game, to talk about some of the good things, the weapons, at first I didn't think you could keep weapons, but then I realized it was just certain items that you lose when you die. So in my mind, when I first started, I was like, okay, how do you get through this game? Because you die left and right. And when you die, you lose everything that you got. But that's not the case. There are some things that you get to keep, and a lot of them are really important, vital things.
Yeah.
But to talk about some of the good things that the game does, it makes you think, and it's really challenging in that regard. And there's a lot of puzzles, even with just in the movement, whether you like it or not, it really makes your brain think. And I don't know. I just like the way it feels good once you get it down. Of course, I played in fixed beat mode, but it feels like a Zelda game. The storyline's pretty good. I like all of the different characters that you can play as. I like basically all the items that you can get, and the fun twist that it puts on it. You can get like, you lose these items, but they help you along the way. They're like power up items, sort of like you get like necklaces, I think, and basically charms that kind of power up your character for a specific amount of time or until you die. And they kind of help you get through certain parts. So I really liked that mechanic. I think it was a nice bit of flavor sprinkled on top of the traditional Zelda format.
I agree. They did bring back a lot of fan favorite items like the hook shot and the bombs, and those can provide some interesting ways to spice up the formula, because most of the time otherwise you're kind of like moving in step with the enemies, trying to chase them down and like stab them when you're adjacent to them. But they give you those fan favorite items that you can use as you wish. Yeah, some of the upgrades, like you were talking about, the kind of the more equipment related things. Well, actually, the equipment, there's a lot of permanent equipment items, but then there's some temporary ones as well, like boots and torches and shovels. Boots and cats. I heard you. And the necklaces, like you said. So there is a distinction between permanent and impermanent upgrades, and the game does a good job of like letting you know which are which. So you're not starting from scratch every time you die. It's a lot more forgiving than that.
Right.
There's even like permanent currency, which are diamonds, and you get those mostly from clearing a screen of enemies. And there's also rupees, which are temporary currency. So if you get like a shit ton of rupees and you die, then you're going to lose all of them. But you can use the diamonds in certain areas to purchase permanent upgrades for weapons and things like that. Whenever you die, you get transported to a store where you can use your diamonds to buy things to help you get a leg up on your next life. But it's actually an optional thing. Like you can turn that off if you want to make the game a little more difficult. And I, being the epic gamer that I am, did indeed turn that off. So I'm feeling pretty good over here.
Damn.
Pretty proud of myself. I wanted to segue into talking about the characters because you do have a few choices. So you start off the game in the tutorial playing as Cadence, who is the character from the original game that this is based off of. And once you get through the tutorial, you get to choose whether to play as Link or Zelda for most of the remainder of the game. And I chose Zelda because I like Zelda. Who did you choose?
I chose Link the second time we went around. Well, so we were Link and Zelda when we played the 2-player mode, and then I was Link this time around.
I see. So each of them have some differing abilities. Like Zelda can use some magic powers for offense and defense, whereas Link can get like advanced sword techniques, and he can get a shield as well at some point. And at some point in the game, you can unlock the other character, and you can unlock Cadence as well. So you have, at the end of the game, you'll have like these 3 characters to rotate as you wish, which I think is pretty cool. I ended up just sticking with Zelda the whole time because I was getting really comfortable with my loadout. And like even to the point where I was using the same weapon the whole time.
Yeah.
So I kind of appreciated that, but also it's really cool that they give you the opportunity to mix it up a little bit. Not too much. Like at the end of the day, I think the gameplay is going to remain like really focused the way that it is right now. The game really does focus on this one aspect of the gameplay, like the rhythm movement, kind of taking stock of everything. And it doesn't offer too much variety besides that, but it does give you the different characters. And there's additional ones you can play as well, like in different game modes and things like that.
Skull Kid is one of them in the DLC.
Yeah, there is a whole new DLC storyline with the Skull Kid. Some of the other gameplay modes, we should mention them as well. They include a permadeath mode for all those really epic gamers out there. I don't know if I could do that, maybe with practice. There's modes called like single character modes, which I think it's basically the same as the main story mode, but they just let you play as one bonus character the whole time. Like you can play as Impa, or you can play as like a Shadow Link in Shadow Zelda. I haven't tried any of this yet, but I do know that they kind of have their own little like self-contained adventures, which again are pretty identical to the main one except for the character. So at the end of the day, like the game doesn't provide a whole lot of variety, but if you get into the gameplay the way that I think I felt, in a positive way, then it's going to provide you with different ways to experiment with that gameplay formula.
Right. And I think the multiple characters thing really works well for the 2-player mode, because you feel like you're 2 individual different important people within the Zelda universe, or you can be Cadence or whatever, but I really like it.
Yeah. Oh, actually, you know what? One of the most important things we should probably talk about before we move on. So as part of the roguelike element of this game, we didn't actually talk about what that means. But basically, roguelike games, it comes from a game called Rogue that was big back in the day, that involved like randomized dungeons and permanent death, or like death where you lose upgrades along the way. So of course, we talked about how you can lose upgrades sometimes. But as far as the randomization goes, every time you start a new file, the overworld is randomized. But then within that overworld, there are a few dungeons, which you have to go and clear out the enemies and the boss and all that stuff. They don't really have puzzles the way that you might expect from a Zelda game, but that's because the whole game is a spin-off, right? But those dungeons, every time you die, those dungeons will be re-randomized. So it's like an extra layer of randomization. And that was something that was frustrating me at first, because the first dungeon I was getting my ass kicked because I was new. And I was like, oh my God, I can't even like rely on my knowledge of the dungeon because that's going to change every time I die. And I was getting kind of mad.
Yeah.
But then like, once I got used to it, I started enjoying it because it brought more variety. So that's one thing to look forward to. Like it has kind of automatic replay value because the overworld will be randomized on your new file. And then the dungeons will be randomized every time you die. And of course, every time you start a file as well. It might not be as big of a randomization as like, doing an Ocarina of Time randomizer or a Pokemon randomizer or something like that, just because the type of game is very different. But it's pretty cool. I really like that ability to mix it up like that.
Yeah, I can see it hurting the gameplay in terms of like being frustrating to some people, but I could also see it like gaining points on content because, that's just adding more variety and replayability to the game. It's kind of an interesting mechanic.
Yeah, because it prevents the developer from giving you like a really tightly curated experience.
Right.
Because, they're not going to say like the level will always be like this, so we're going to make it perfect. They have to rely on their algorithm. I found it worked out pretty well, in my opinion, for my playthrough. I didn't notice anything that was like really out of whack or that didn't make sense. So I guess more playthroughs would be required to stress test that.
True. Well, I don't have a whole lot more to say about the gameplay.
Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with what I've said as well. Ready to give your score?
Yeah. So this one was kind of interesting for me to rate. While I don't think it's the most enjoyable for me, I can see it being I think overall it has pretty solid gameplay, and I don't think there's a whole lot that's wrong with it if you know what the game is about. I just kind of wanted to explain my score a little bit.
Sure.
So I gave it an 82.
I'm pretty close to you. I gave it an 85.
Oh, nice. Cool. We were like kind of right on the money there.
Yeah, I think like kind of the difficulty curve lost it a few points on my end. Too hard at the beginning, too easy at the end. Oh, and also kind of like the how laser focused it is on the one type of gameplay, I could see that not being as interesting to many people. But I found it to be like really crisp and polished. Like what the game does, I think it does really well, except for the difficulty curve. But like the moment to moment gameplay, it feels to me very satisfying.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. If you know what to expect from the game, which it's kind of hard to know what to expect, but yeah, it could be. It's a really solid game. It's just difficult, and the way they go about implementing it could be kind of weird. But we've talked about it anyway. Moving on to the aesthetics. The visuales, Pete Boy. How pretty did you think this game looked?
I thought it was very pretty, to be quite honest with you. I thought that the art style was very cute and vibrant. Definitely taking inspiration from Link to the Past and also from like the Toon Link games.
Yeah.
It was a very nice art style. I found it to be quite detailed as well in the pixel art. Maybe not quite so detailed as something like Stardew Valley, but it kind of makes sense because in this game, everything's very fast-paced, at least if you're playing in the regular mode. And like if things were getting too crazy, then maybe it'd be hard to tell where things are. Sometimes the screen does get really crowded with like the landscape and the enemies. But I think they did some neat tricks to make it easier to tell what was going on in those cases.
Yeah.
But as far as like the actual prettiness, I found it to be very pretty and it ran smoothly as well. I never saw any like performance problems.
Yeah, honestly, I kind of echo those same sentiments. It was a really vibrant game and it was a really immersive Zelda world. You never felt like you were in a spin-off game, which I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And is one thing I think they probably wanted to nail home was that you are actually in Hyrule. I think they did a really good job of that with the visuals, and I think the visuals are really fun, really neat, and yeah, it's meant to look like Link to the Past. You brought up a lot of good points on your end. I don't have a whole lot to say other than it looks really good. And like you said, it can be simple at times, and it can also have too much going on the screen. But with that said, no frame rate drops even on the Switch. Can't complain too much.
I found that the animations had a lot of personality as well. And overall, I also think the design of the enemies were really great, especially the bosses that were like mashups of existing Zelda bosses with musical instruments.
Yeah.
So, for example, there is one boss called Wiz Robo, oboe as in the flute instrument or the clarinet instrument, O-B-O-E. So, and there are always puns like that as well. They did a good job of choosing instruments that would make the design cool and also make a nice pun out of it.
Right. And particularly that boss was like, when it goes with the beat and like the oboe and all the musical instruments and everything, which kind of makes sense, it just kind of like looks good all together. Like when all of those things are coming together, it's like a very epic moment. When you have a game about rhythm,
yeah, and
there's like a big boss, you kind of like, it makes it that much more epic. And I know that kind of goes into the audio a little bit, but when the animations looked really good, like you said, and like the moves from the big bosses, makes that moment like really epic. It just all came together really nicely.
Yeah. One fun fact I learned is that apparently some artists from the game Sonic Mania, which came out in like 2018 or 2017, apparently some of those artists also helped with the art on this game. So not too surprised to hear that because of how good both of those games look.
Yeah. I didn't play any of the other cadences. I wonder how weird the mesh or the crossover was between the two games.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've never played the original either.
Like, if somebody's coming from a different Cadence game, are they going to be like, whoa, this is trippy? Or are they going to be like, this is exactly like, Cadence? I don't know.
The only other visual thing I have really to talk about is the user interface, which I don't have too much to say about it, which actually is a good thing. Because they say, if you don't notice something that's designed, then that means it's doing its job. The menus are pretty simple and they do their job. I did find that the inventory screen when you press start can be like really overwhelming because of like all the spaces there are to fill with items. So when I first paused, I was like, what the fuck? Am I really going to get this many items? That's crazy.
Yeah.
But, over time, you familiarize yourself with everything that you're getting. And so that doesn't really become a problem.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Not a whole lot to say. The navigation between the menus was kind of odd, I think, in terms of button mapping. I wasn't sure, I don't know. I kept pushing the wrong button to pull up my map. But Maybe that's just a me thing.
Yeah, I don't really have too many problems with that.
Yeah. Oh, well. But yeah, no complaints from me there. Really, I don't have much more to say about the visuals, but kudos.
Kudos indeed. Yeah, I'm good to go. I will give you my score.
What is it?
Which was a hot, fresh 90.
90. Wow, I gave it a 93.
Damn, we're like tight.
I know. It's
just so far.
It's like we know how to rate these games. It's like we have like a similar opinion on video games.
Yeah. Actually, I think both of our scores so far have been within 3 points of the other.
Damn. Well, let's see if the trend continues on to audio. I'll start off by saying this soundtrack slaps. That's literally, one of my biggest reasons why I wanted to play this game. I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to listen to The Legend of Zelda, soundtrack music in this really cool rock and roll styled theme. And oh my goodness, was I not disappointed. It's kind of, I will say being so focused on the rhythm and the gameplay kind of takes away from the epicness of it. But man, when you're fighting a dungeon boss or something like that, it makes the moment all the more epic. And all the sound effects sound really good too, because I know everybody's on edge to see what I'm going to think about the sound effects of the game. Well, I can tell you right now that it's really good in this game, and I have zero complaints in terms of audio with this game.
Damn, 100 incoming from Kevboy?
100 possibly incoming.
Possibly incoming. I agree for the most part. Well, actually, no, not even for the most part. I agree. I agree, man. Yeah, music's really good. The main soundtrack was done by a composer-producer named Danny B, who has actually made a name for himself in the past several years, the past decade, really, with indie games. Super Meat Boy, he did that soundtrack. He did the soundtrack of Binding of Isaac. He remastered or recreated would be the proper word, the Cave Story soundtrack for Cave Story Plus, which we also reviewed on the show. Go check that out.
Hell yeah.
So yeah, he's a guy who definitely has a lot of experience. And as part of the DLC, they included, I think, 3 additional soundtracks where you can go in the menu and you can toggle, for this character, do I want the soundtracks to be made by this person instead of the default? Or maybe you want to change it by area of the game. It's very granular.
Yeah.
Possibly too granular, to be honest with you, but it gives you a lot of options. I just stuck with the main soundtrack because I was jamming with it, but I do look forward to playing this game again with some different soundtracks because they were in pretty different styles. One of them was way more heavy metal. And one of them was more just more purely electronic, whereas the default one kind of mixes in acoustic instruments as well. Man,
that's really cool.
Yeah.
To put that much love and effort into it. But I mean, I guess that, makes sense. This is the kind of game that if it's, based off rhythm and music and you're talking about Zelda, it needs that kind of love and attention. I'm wondering if Nintendo was like, you have to get this right.
It was funny you said earlier that hearing these remixes was one of the main reasons you wanted to play this game. Me being the music guy that I am, you think that would be the reason for me to play the game too. But I was honestly more interested in the gameplay aspect of it.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking oh, I can't wait to hear the music, but it was really good.
I wonder if going into it as you're going to be the composer for the game, you have the songs, what the notes are going to be. So I wonder if that leaves more time and effort open to remixing the sounds rather than creating your own.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually that segues into another thing I wanted to say, which was that a lot of these tracks are they're more medleys and not just so much straight remixes of a certain song. So the overworld theme, kind of in the main default Hyrule field type of area, because there's other areas as well. In that area, you'll hear a remix of the Hyrule field Ocarina of Time theme, the Link to the Past Hyrule Field theme, the Wind Waker Ocean theme. It really is cool how they would, take all of these areas and kind of blend them together and make these new medleys, which gives them even more opportunity to be creative with it, as you were saying. Not only are they given these starting points, but they're taking all these different chunks and mashing them together and making whole new audio cakes, if you will, with these ingredients. So I don't know why I said this baking metaphor. I must be hungry or something.
Oh, that was awesome.
Anyway, it's cool. You can definitely tell that they put a lot of love into it and that they really did like relish the opportunity to make this musical tribute to Zelda.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have a whole lot more to say.
I have a fun fact, which is that the sound design, as in the sound effects, were done by a group called Power Up Audio. They were the same people who did the sound effects to Celeste.
Oh, that is pretty cool. They incorporated a lot of stuff from other indie games as well. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah, they really do that modernized retro sound effects aesthetic very well. And it blended in really nicely with the gameplay and the visuals and everything.
So is it time for our rankings?
I think so. Why don't you go ahead, buddy?
I'm going to give it a 99.
Damn.
1 point away.
There was like that one note in the one song that you didn't like.
I think it's more along the lines of like it's not like original composition. So
yeah.
it's more or less being creative with like previously existing works rather than, having the game's own like soundtrack, I guess you would say. It does, but it's utilizing soundtracks from other games. So that's really the only reason I would want to not give it 100, I guess. And whereas Ocarina of Time, the only 100 I've given, gets it because, Ocarina of Time, I guess Ocarina of Time did borrow some songs too. But they have some songs on their own that they came up with or have, their legendary soundtracks, if you will.
Yeah, I got you. I think what you're saying, if I can summarize it, is that this game doesn't have like quite the ability to be iconic because it's all like remixes and medleys and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I got you. You know what? I'm actually going to change my score on the fly here, something that I very rarely do.
Okay.
Originally, I was going to give it a hot, fresh 90, but I'm actually going to bump it up to a 95.
Nice.
Because I kind of had a similar feeling as you. Like it's hard for me to consider this game iconic soundtrack-wise, but the whole point of it was to be a tribute to Zelda. Not to like really necessarily be anything that is iconic on its own. And I think it is a fantastic tribute. You can really hear the love that went into each and every note.
Oh, hold up. I can't put it above Banjo. It's got a 98.
That's fine. That's valid.
98.
Look at all this live revisions.
Yeah, I originally wrote down 98 and then I bumped it up to 99 because I was getting geeked out. And then now I'm back to 98 because it can't be above Banjo. So sorry. Bias. But yeah, so that does it for our aesthetics section.
Yeah, now it's time for everyone's second favorite section.
The content. I believe it is your turn to do the content.
Yeah. So we always talk about playtime. How many hours am I going to get for my money? My first playthrough took me about 8 hours, which is including a little bit of extra like item completion that I didn't necessarily have to do. My good friend howlongtobeat.com is pretty much in agreement with that. This is not a long game. There's the additional storylines as well that given some extra hours of content. We haven't, at least I haven't played those, so I can't speak to how long they are, but they're probably just like a couple of hours each if I were to guess. But as I said, we're kind of going on the base content here for this review. Yeah, so it's a short game. It's very focused. And I think that's kind of how these roguelike games tend to be, where the replay value and like kind of the hook is the ability for your adventure to be a little bit different every time. So they're not focusing on like overwhelming you with a big long journey. It's all about the variations of that journey. And I think that's pretty cool. It's a lot different than some of the other games we've played so far, but I think it's interesting to evaluate it as being a different kind of game.
Yeah, I can agree with that. The content, you may only get like 8 hours out of one playthrough, but I think there's a lot of, as we discussed before, there's a lot of replayability and replay value to this game, and where you can play it in different ways that you never had before going back through, whether that be you want to play it in a different, for me, for example, let's say I beat the game, fixed beat mode, and then I want to, challenge myself and then not do the fixed beat mode. And then there's harder modes than that, or there's different modes than that. And then there's also 2-player mode that I can play with my buddies and things like that. So you're honestly getting a good amount of content out of it. And you could also 100% the game. And then, you know what, if you're like, you know what, damn, I've played all these game modes and I've done all this shit. You know what, I think I want to speed run this game. Well, you know what, you can do that too. But yeah, I think there's a good amount of, content to this game, a surprising amount of content, I would actually say, even with like, as you were talking about changing the music, choosing different styles of music or playing with different characters, to start out with and getting a different map each time that you play. Like it's got a lot of content in it, I believe, for a roguelike. And, for the genre, I believe it's, one of the top notch content games.
I don't know if I'm familiar enough with roguelikes to make a claim like that, but I do agree that there are a bunch of different variations and options and ways to make your game more replayable.
Yeah, I guess I should say that of the roguelikes that I've played, which is just a handful, but of the roguelikes I've played, this one has the most variety that I've seen.
I will say though, and it's hard for me to make a judgment on this without having played more playthroughs, but I think that how much you enjoy that extra content for this game more than most, that really depends on how much you like the core gameplay, because the game really is like straight up the core gameplay.
Yeah.
We talked about this a little bit like with Mario 64. There's not really anything extra for you to do or like side games or like side content or things like that, which in this game is like really obvious, I think, because it is, kind of a smaller game and it's very focused. So if I ended up not liking the gameplay, then all this extra content would mean like literally nothing to me, which applies to other games to some extent, but I think in this game it applies extra hard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Maybe that's why, the DLC is the DLC. They're like, okay, we're going to make it, we're going to make this extra content if you want it. But we're not going to give it to you for free because you have to enjoy the game. I don't know. I thought the DLC initially was kind of expensive for what it was. I mean, if the base game is what, $24.99?
Yeah.
And then the total of your DLC is $15.
Yep.
That's over half of the game price. So, I mean, I thought it was a little steep for what, it was originally sold for. But I guess, if you're really enjoying the game and you're getting a lot of extra content for what I've seen. So, yeah.
You're also paying for the Zelda brand.
Yeah.
If this were like some other indie game that didn't have Zelda, I think they would be charging less. Like, for example, Shovel Knight and Stardew Valley, like those games, you actually get a pretty ridiculous amount of content for what you pay for the game. Like, as far as value goes, you can hardly beat those games. But with this one, you are paying for the Link and Zelda, so
yeah,
you have to keep that in mind. But, I mean, on that note, though, I found the whole game overall to be very polished. It didn't feel like I was playing some random game from a random studio. It felt like I was playing, like, a really solid game by people who knew what the fuck they were doing, whether Nintendo or not. Turns out, not Nintendo. So there we go. Indie games are the best.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have a whole lot more to say, man. I know this is a shorter episode than most, but...
also a shorter game than most, so there we go.
Yeah, shorter game than most.
Yeah, I'm ready to give my score. I gave it a hot, fresh 85 for content.
85, nice. I'll give it an 88.
Nice. We're still rocking that 3-point margin, I think, on every single category.
Damn. So you could probably expect this game to be, well, we'll see. We'll do the number crunching. You probably already know if you've been keeping track. You got your pencil and pen out as we're saying these episodes, but we got to do the number crunching. So we'll be right back.
Hello again, everyone. It's your favorite boys. We have our score summaries ready and raring to go, so I'll start. I gave gameplay an 85. As far as aesthetics, I gave it a 90 for visuals and a 95 for audio, which makes my aesthetics a 92.5. Content, I gave an 85. So my overall score for Cadence of Hyrule is 87.5.
Nice. So I gave my gameplay an 82. For my aesthetics section, I gave the visuales a 93 and the audio a 98, bringing my aesthetics score to a 95.5. And then my content was an 88. So that brings my overall score to an 88.5. And if you're keeping track, the math wasn't too hard to do here. So when we went to go do number crunching, you're probably like, these idiots. But yeah, so our IG score is an 88.
Nice ass, round ass, 88.0.
Yeah. Hell.
Gotta love those round asses.
Yeah. That makes it the 22nd best game of all time.
I love how we treat our list as like the definitive list of best games of, I mean, because it is, right?
Right, exactly. If we haven't reviewed it, sorry.
This like upper 80s range is very crowded. I was looking at my scores from episodes past, and at one point before I'd done some revisions, my score for this game was like an 86.6 or something. And I had like 3 games with that exact rating, kind of in those like lower 25 ranks. And I was like, oh man, like field's getting pretty thick here.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting also is that you and I had such similar scores for every category, but it seemed like, well, I don't know, it seemed like at first you didn't enjoy the game very much, whereas I did enjoy it more off the bat. But it kind of sounds like you came around as you kind of tweaked with the settings and found the gameplay that you liked.
Yeah, for sure. At first I was like, there's no way I can give this a good gameplay score. I'm just dying left and right. How could I? But as I began to explore through the dungeon, like explore through my first dungeon and kind of get a grasp on the gameplay, I was like, okay, I can understand, the appeal behind this game, and I could see it being fun, and I don't want to completely shit on it because I don't think it deserves that. Thus, the ratings that I gave it. I still don't think the gameplay is outstanding, but if you are looking for a game, like a roguelike game that's, pretty low cost and a little bit of fun, and you like Zelda a whole lot, definitely give this game a try, especially if you like the soundtracks from all of the previous Zelda games. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, it's certainly a great tribute to the Zelda series. I don't know how it stacks up as like a roguelike game compared to other ones because I haven't really played them, but as someone who's new to the genre, I enjoyed it. I would recommend that anyone who gets frustrated by earlier or by difficulty in the earlier game, I would recommend that they stick with it and try it out and maybe change the settings if you need to. Absolutely no shame in doing that. So do whatever you want to do to make the game more fun for you, because I think it is worth playing through and seeing and hearing everything that it has to offer.
I agree, man.
But anyway, shout outs to our lovely patrons who provide financial support for the show. Kev, do you have the list of them pulled up?
Yes, I do. I have them right here. First, we have Dolphin Dasher, Justin Probst, Z-Link, and Ryan Everett. Thank you so much for supporting us, week in and week out. Actually, month in and month out, sorry. Month in and month out. You guys have just been around keeping us going. You enable us to do what we're doing, and we couldn't thank you enough. Yeah,
but we try. We try to thank you profusely in every episode. Let us know if we're doing a good job or if you need us to, lay it on a little bit thicker.
Yeah, if we need to do more patron stuff, like show you sexy photos of Peter, let us know. We've got a handful of them.
A handful that you know about.
But anyway,
we're going to move on from this topic as quickly as possible. Thank you so much for listening to this show. We have some great stuff in store for you as always. The season's only 3 episodes in, I believe, by this point, so we got a lot more coming.
Hell yeah, brother.
Enjoy your holidays. Be safe out there, everyone. And love you too.
Love you too, guys.